You don't always leave people because you dislike them. Sometimes you leave because being seen feels exhausting. Sometimes the room is warm, the conversation is fine, and you still feel yourself disappearing inside. You answer texts later, cancel plans gently, and tell yourself you just need a night. But the truth is, one night turns into distance, and distance starts feeling safer. Not because you hate people, because your mind never really stops when other people are near. While everyone else seems to move with the moment, you keep noticing what lives underneath it. The pause before a laugh. The tension behind a compliment. The sadness hidden inside someone saying they're just tired. You catch things other people miss, and eventually, that changes how closeness feels. It makes connection beautiful. It also makes it heavy. Because deep thinkers rarely enter a conversation with only the conversation. They bring memory, pattern recognition, emotional context, and 1,000 silent interpretations. One sentence can stay with them for 3 days. One strange tone can open 10 possible meanings. One awkward silence can feel louder than everything actually said. So while others think a moment passed, deep thinkers are still carrying it home. That is part of why they pull away. Not to punish anyone. Not to act mysterious. Not because they believe they're better than everyone else. They pull away because being around people can become mentally crowded in ways nobody notices. Some people leave social situations drained because they talk too much. Deep thinkers often leave drained because they were processing too much. They were reading faces, filtering reactions, predicting outcomes, and managing what they chose not to say. They were present on the outside and overloaded on the inside. And after enough of that, solitude stops feeling lonely. It starts feeling like oxygen. A lot of deep thinkers learned early that quiet observation was safer than full expression. Maybe they grew up around unpredictable moods. Maybe they had to study the room before speaking. Maybe being emotionally aware wasn't a gift at first. Maybe it was survival. When you learn to scan people before you trust them, your brain does not forget. It keeps checking. It keeps preparing. It keeps noticing little shifts other people would never even register. That hyperawareness can look like wisdom from the outside. From the inside, it often feels like never fully unclenching. So when a deep thinker pulls away, it is not always a preference. Sometimes it is a nervous system asking for less input. Sometimes it is the mind begging for one room where nothing needs decoding. Because decoding people is exhausting when you've done it most of your life. And the strange part is, deep thinkers usually want connection very badly. They are not detached in the cold way people imagine. They often crave honesty, tenderness, and conversations that feel real enough to breathe inside. But shallow closeness can feel lonelier than being alone. Small talk does not tire them because it is simple. It tires them because it asks them to stay on the surface. And people who live with depth cannot stay shallow for long without feeling split. So they smile politely. They say the right thing. They make it through dinner. Then they go home feeling even farther away from everyone. That is a specific kind of loneliness. Being surrounded but untouched. Being included but unseen. Being liked but not understood. Deep thinkers often know this feeling too well. They know what it is like to have many conversations and almost no relief. They know what it is like to explain themselves carefully and still be misread. They know what it is like to share something honest and watch it get handled lightly. And after enough of those moments, withdrawal starts becoming less dramatic than hope. Because hope can be expensive when it keeps landing in the wrong hands. There is also another reason deep thinkers pull away that almost nobody talks about. They often carry a private fear of being too much, too intense, too serious, too emotionally layered, too hard to understand without effort. Most people do not seem willing to give. So they edit themselves before anyone asks them to. They shorten the story. They soften the truth. They hide the complicated part behind a joke and call it being easygoing. Then later, alone, they feel the grief of not having been real. This is why they can seem warm and distant at the same time. They care deeply. They just do not always feel safe showing the full weight of that care. A deep thinker can sit beside someone they love and still feel internally separate. Not because love is absent, because full expression still feels risky. They know how quickly people confuse depth with difficulty, how often honesty gets mistaken for heaviness, how easily emotional intelligence gets treated like overthinking. So they start saving their real thoughts for private spaces, long walks, late nights, notes app confessions nobody reads, the drive home after smiling through another conversation that never really reached them. And yes, some of it is overthinking, but not in the dismissive way people usually mean it. It is not always irrational spiraling. Sometimes it is a highly alert mind trying to make emotional sense of incomplete information. Sometimes it is pattern memory. Sometimes it is old pain recognizing a familiar shape too early. If you've been misunderstood enough, your mind starts rehearsing protection before closeness even begins. You do not just meet people. You anticipate them. You study what they might need, what they might judge, and what they might leave. That anticipation makes connection harder than it looks. Because while other people are simply bonding, deep thinkers are already considering emotional consequences. Will this person use my honesty against me later? Will they disappear once I stop being easy? Will they still stay if they see how much I actually notice? These questions are rarely spoken out loud, but they quietly shape how much someone reveals and how soon they pull back. This shows up in everyday moments more than people realize. Someone asks how you're doing, and you say tired because the real answer feels impossible. A friend changes their tone slightly and your chest tightens before your mind explains why. You replay a conversation in the shower because one sentence felt almost harmless but not quite. You leave a gathering early and call it a busy week. You stare at a text for an hour because you can hear 10 meanings behind it. You want to be close, but closeness keeps feeling like work before it feels like comfort. At work, you may look calm while your mind tracks every subtle shift in energy. Who seems irritated? Who was holding back? Who suddenly went quiet after your suggestion? You absorb more than you mean to, then wonder why you're exhausted by noon. In relationships, this can become even more intense. You notice what your partner is not saying before they say anything at all. You sense distance early. You feel inconsistency fast. You hear the slight disconnect between words and energy, and it stays with you. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes you're protecting yourself from ghosts. Usually, it's a mix of both. And that mix is hard to live with, because it means your insight can help you. It can also isolate you. Family can be complicated too, especially if you grew up being the one who understood everybody else's feelings, the one who kept peace, the one who noticed tension before it became conflict, the one who learned that reading the room mattered more than being fully yourself. People praise that child for being mature. What they don't see is how often maturity begins as adaptation. When that child becomes an adult, rest does not come naturally. Neither does trust. You may know how to care for others without knowing how to stop monitoring them. You may know how to make people comfortable while feeling deeply uncomfortable yourself. You may know how to be needed without knowing how to be held. That creates a heartbreaking pattern. You become emotionally available in all the ways that hide your own need. Then one day, you pull away from everyone and nobody understands why. They think you changed suddenly. They do not see the months of silent depletion underneath that distance. They did not feel the conversations you kept surviving. They did not hear the thoughts you kept swallowing. They did not notice how long you were translating yourself into something easier to receive. So when you finally disappear for a while, it looks confusing from the outside. From the inside, it feels overdue. Still, pulling away is not always healing. Sometimes it is just relief. And relief can look a lot like peace when you've been overwhelmed too long. That matters. Because solitude can restore a deep thinker, but isolation can quietly harden them. It can turn discernment into suspicion, reflection into rumination, self-protection into a life where nobody gets close enough to prove they are safe. That is the hidden risk. When leading becomes your most reliable comfort, staying starts to feel unnatural. Even with good people. Even with people trying their best. Even with love. So the goal is not to shame yourself for pulling away. There is a reason your mind reaches for space. There is wisdom in needing recovery. There is honesty in admitting that too much stimulation becomes emotional fog for you. But there is also a question worth asking gently. Are you resting? Or are you disappearing? Because those are not the same thing. Rest brings you back to yourself. Disappearing slowly erases the parts of you that still want to connect. Deep thinkers do not need more pressure to be social. They need safer forms of connection. Slower conversations. People who do not punish pauses. Relationships where silence is not awkward, honesty is not dangerous, and complexity is not a burden. They need spaces where they do not have to perform normalcy just to belong. And when they find that, something softens. They stop editing every sentence. They stop rehearsing every truth. They stop treating their sensitivity like a problem to manage. Not all at once, but enough to stay. Enough to breathe while being known. Enough to realize that depth does not always have to lead to distance. That realization changes something important. Because the issue is never that you feel too much or think too deeply. The issue is that many environments are not built for the way you process life. They reward speed over reflection, charm over sincerity, noise over truth. And if you keep placing a deep inner world inside shallow spaces, of course you'll retreat. That is not weakness. That is friction. And maybe the most healing thing is understanding this without turning it into identity worship. Deep thinking is not automatically special. It does not make someone wiser, kinder, or more evolved. Sometimes it just means your mind goes farther and stays longer. Sometimes that creates insight. Sometimes it creates pain. Often it creates both at once. So if you are someone who keeps pulling away, maybe start with honesty instead of judgment. Maybe say, being around people is harder for me than it looks. Maybe admit that your silence is not emptiness. It is processing. Maybe notice that your distance is not always rejection. Sometimes it is recovery from carrying too much unsaid life inside one body. And maybe, over time, you stop asking why you're not more like everyone else. Maybe you start asking what kind of connection actually feels safe enough for the real you. That question matters more. Because forcing yourself into constant closeness will only deepen the exhaustion. But learning your own emotional pace can change the quality of everything. Who you trust, what you tolerate, when you speak, when you leave, and when you finally stay. The truth is, deep thinkers often pull away because closeness costs them more energy. Not because they are broken, not because they are cold, but because their inner world is crowded, sensitive, and painfully awake. They are not avoiding people as much as they are trying to protect their ability to feel. And when you understand that, the distance starts making heartbreaking sense. Maybe you were never hard to love. Maybe you were just rarely met in the depth where you actually live. So you learn to retreat there alone. But being alone in your depth is not the same as being meant for aloneness. Sometimes it only means you have been surviving with very little resonance. And if this has been your pattern, maybe let this thought stay with you tonight. You do not need fewer thoughts to deserve connection. You need spaces where your mind does not have to hide to be accepted. You need people who are not scared by stillness. People who hear the carefulness in your words and do not rush past it. People who understand that when you pull away, something inside you is overwhelmed, not absent. Until then, be careful not to mistake self-protection for your entire personality. You are not only the one who leaves. You are also the one who longs. The one who notices beauty no one mentions. The one who feels truth before it becomes language. The one who pulls away, yes, but only because somewhere inside, connection still matters that much.